Okay. Good morning, everybody. So the PowerPoint is quite wordy, and we're going to go through the PowerPoint, but quite honestly, I think open discussion is better because I think the more we can share with each other, I think the more we take away, because you can always go back and look at the PowerPoint later. So I am an intervention specialist with the district. I've been with the district for nearly 30 years. But I'm not retiring anytime soon because I decided to have a child at 41. So I'm still going to be here for a while. But I have three beautiful daughters. One will be a senior this next year. One will be a junior. Had them close together because that's all I wanted. Then I had another one quite a few years later. So I have a 10-year-old, and I was thinking about your story about your son at TCU at the music camp. And it is parent shaming. We do a lot, like you said, and I get to thinking about my 10-year-old who, my two older daughters, I had in ballet. They did a great job. They're not ballerinas, but, you know, it was something fun to do. So I decided, well, I'm going to carry on that tradition. So I put my third one in ballet. And so we get in there, and you're at this snooty ballet studio where they don't even let you in to see, you know, it's like behind closed doors. And they come out, and they're like, Miss Cohen, we've got a problem. She's swinging on the bar instead of plie-ing on the bar. And I'm like, well, are any of the other kids doing it? And they were like, no. And so they brought me back, and they let me actually observe for a minute. And honest to goodness, my kid was swinging on the bar, not plie-ing. So I talked to a friend of mine who said, well, does she have a hard time focusing? I was like, well, I never noticed it till I saw her in this class. You know, and she was in a daycare, and I never got, you know, she was a kid that got bitten. She wasn't the kid that did the biting. So I didn't think anything was wrong. And so she said, well, you know, if she possibly may have ADD or something, you know, there's two things you can do. She said karate and gymnastics are great for kids that have a hard time focusing. So she was like, you ought to try one of those two. And I was like, well, I don't really like watching karate, but I love watching the Olympics. So I was like, so we'll try and she was swinging on the bar, so we tried the gymnastics. And she is now 10 years old, and she's a level 8 state champion gymnast. So who knew, right? Here I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have had that third kid. Like, oh, and I had her at 41, so now she's going to have all these problems. It turned out she just wasn't into the ballet. So a lot of times I think we also, we not only parent shame, but we think worst case scenario all the time, when a lot of times it's not always worst case scenario. So that being said, I wanted to start in on our slides. So this is just, next one. It's seeing the world through the lens of trauma, the age differences in interventions, because you're going to see as we go through this and as they develop, you see it differently. You're going to see it different in little kids, you're going to see it in elementary, and you're certainly going to see it differently in secondary ages with middle school and high school. So this is just basically what trauma is, okay? So trauma is a person experiences or witness or is confronted with an actual or threatened death or serious injury or threat to the physical integrity of oneself or others. So that includes often a response of intense fear, helplessness, or horror. It can result from private or public experiences. So this is just kind of a little, God bless you, little background just of what trauma is. These are kind of the definitions of what trauma is. And again, wordy PowerPoints, we know how that goes when we go to training, so I don't really want to focus so much on this as much as kind of some of the things that go along with it, but it can be an actual extreme threat of physical or psychological harm, withholding of material or relational resources essential to the healthy development, and it can be a single event or repeated events. And then you go into, so you have your actual event, you have how they experience the event, which we all experience things differently, and then the effects of the event. Something can happen to one person and it doesn't stay with them, whereas it can happen to another person and it stays with them forever. And so we have to think about that with our kids. How is it going to affect one kid versus another kid? Some kids can lose a grandparent and they can move on from it. Another kid can lose a grandparent and 3 years later it comes back, and that's what part of the trauma that they experienced is from. So it kind of just depends on how it affects them. Okay, so this is just some more information about trauma. The biggest thing from this slide to take away is that at least 50% of all the kiddos and people that we're dealing with that end up in some sort of a counseling service. At least 50% of those people have experienced some sort or form of trauma at some point. They may not realize it when they go into the counseling. They may go into counseling as an adult because they're going through a divorce, and then stuff starts coming out about things in the past. So that's kind of where we're at with that. So what we know, trauma can result from adverse childhood experiences, natural disasters, accidents, interpersonal violence, or war. I think about the natural disasters. I was at a middle school at the time when Katrina hit, and we had an influx of students that came in. And working with those kids, it was the first experience I'd ever had working with kids who had been through a natural disaster of some sort. It was fascinating to experience through their eyes what a heavy rainstorm might be like outside, like especially the ones we've had here recently. But what those kids experienced, the PTSD that those kids experienced, the need to cling on to their material possessions when they were given something. You know, they would have fights over it because they were scared to death that it might go away because they lost everything. They traveled here with trash bags of nothing, you know, and so it was very interesting to experience that through the eyes of a child, what they were going through. And so that's just, again, another form of trauma. Earlier severe or chronic trauma can affect the brain, which we kind of focused on that a little bit earlier. And it does have a high correlation with poor health later on. I read the other day that trauma is now being associated with people that are addicted to cigarettes. So cigarette addiction is now being directly associated with some form of childhood trauma. So it's like all of a sudden, everybody's talking about it, whereas before nobody wanted to talk about it. It was push it down, push it away, get over it, and move on your merry way, and then grow up to be an adult. And so, or a productive adult. And so now it's just, there's so many things that are correlating back to what trauma actually does to us. So this is just some definitions, more definitions of trauma. Chronic trauma may refer to long-standing physical abuse, neglect, or war. Trauma represents when with the war thing, I was at South Hills High School. I've kind of hit all the hills at some point. But South Hills High School, I worked with a group of kiddos that came in from Iraq. And one of the little girls, she wanted to be hip. Like, she wanted to be, like, kind of halfway emo, but halfway like it was, she didn't really know what she wanted to be, but she got a couple of piercings against her mother's will. She was wearing all black, kind of the combat boots. Like, she just didn't know what she wanted to be, but she knew she didn't want to be this kid in this little, she didn't want to be labeled, and they all lived in the same apartment complex. They were all, she just wanted to kind of become Americanized, so to speak. And so, anyway, she was watching some video with some other kid, and it was a video, it was YouTube, and it was this kid, like, laid on the ground and then started, it wasn't like break dancing, but it was like he was like gyrating. I don't know how to say it, but he was like dancing on the ground. Well, this child freaks out. She starts screaming in class. She starts rocking and holding her head and screaming. So they brought her to my office. So, it took forever to get her to want to talk because she didn't want to talk. She didn't trust anybody. She didn't want to talk. Finally, we got to talking, and I said, well, so, obviously the video was a trigger of some sort. We just didn't have any idea what it was about. So it turns out her father was beheaded in front of her family back where they lived, and the way the kid was laying on the ground and the movements the kid was making was exactly what she remembers seeing when this happened to her dad, which was one of the reasons they ended up, I don't know how they ended up in Fort Worth, Texas, but it was one of the reasons that they left was for safety. And so that video, so all the other kids are just watching a video. It's a funny YouTube video, right? But this triggered something so severe and so traumatic in her past. And I just wonder, had that not happened, of course, then we got Catholic Charities got involved. Mom didn't want them coming to the home, and Mom didn't want to take them to her, so we were able to get it worked out that they would actually come into the school and work with she and her sibling, because there was a lot of taboo with counseling services and, the cultural stuff and everything. But I just wonder, would we have ever known had it not been that random time with that video? Because like I said, the only thing I knew about her was she was quirky and she was kind of trying to rebel a little bit against her mom. But we had no idea that that's what was really going on. So you just never know what you're going to get with your kiddos. It's transgenerational, and I see it a lot now at Western Hills where I work, because I have so many kids who are living with grandparents or great-grandparents or aunts and uncles, and you see where you start hearing their stories, and you hear that these stories dated back to things that happened when they were, you know, their mom was abused or their grandmother was abused and they ended up living with this person. So it's like it just, the cycle continues a lot of times with the trauma like we were talking about earlier. And so one of the biggest things is that, you know, relationships with caregivers, it takes a critical role because we got to have their input. We got to have them on board with us trying to stop this and trying to keep it from continuing. So, the meaning of a traumatic event is based on their individual state of neurological, cognitive, and emotional development. I go back to, again, everybody handles situations differently. Something that affects me deeply that I hold on to may not affect the next person the same way. So it kind of just depends a lot of times on who they are, where they're at with their development, their emotional, social, cognitive development. So we were talking about the kids earlier. You got the kid that's acting out all the time, right? So you got that kid, that's a red flag, something's going on. Why, gentleman in the back talked about putting all of our little apples in the same basket, you know, in a classroom, and you got the kiddo that's acting out and the one or two, so it's like red flags, something's going on with these kids. But you also have to watch for that kid that doesn't act out, that's quiet all the time, that doesn't interact with other people. You know, the kid that looks scared of their own shadow, the kid that looks like they're about to attack at any time. You know, that's a kid you have to look for too, and that's not the one that's it's not the one that's getting all the attention, but it's the one that may need a whole lot more attention because there might be something underlying there. So relationships are huge with family, with friends, with everything. Relationships are huge. I think it's sad when we do what we call student support plans with Fort Worth ISD. So if we say we do a suicide or violence assessment, or we have a kid that's been in a bullying situation, you know, something like that, we do support plans. And part of that support plan is creating goals and creating ways that we want to accomplish those goals. But a big part of it is your support system. And I think it's very sad sometimes when you ask a kid, now again, I'm in a high school, so you're not supposed to really get along with your parents in high school, you know, so I get that. You know, most kids, there's a couple of years where parents are not cool, and I am, you know. But when you ask a kid, can you name 3 adults here at school that you would go to if you had a problem or if you needed help or support? And then you ask 3 friends and 3 people in the community. It's very sad to me when a lot of times you can't get them to name even one person. And so they don't have anybody to go to help them work through that. And that's what I think we have to get back to, is building those relationships again, because these kids just don't have anybody. They don't have anybody to talk to. They go home, they've had a bad day, something happens at home, they come to school, they're not talking. And that's why I go back to that kid that's completely silent all the time, that just has no facial expression. There could be a whole lot more going on with that kid. So I always work with the kids, and I always tell them, just think of one person at school that you think you would give me one person, and they're like, you. And I'm like, okay, so that's one person. So then we need to start building this relationship, because I need you to know that you can come to me anytime. Or if they say a teacher or a campus monitor or whatever, I don't care who it is. Just tell me, is there one person that you would go to? And once we identify that one person, if it's not me, then that person I bring in, and then we work together. So now you have 2 people that you identify with. See how it works? And then so you got a pastor, you have an uncle, a cousin, somebody that's a good influence, somebody that you would talk. You know, they finally start thinking about it, and they're like, well, I do have this really cool aunt or whatever. And then it's like, okay, so we bring that person in. So now you have 3 people that you identify with, you know? So it's like You just have to get them to realize that there are people out there that you identify with. It's just right now you're upset and you're angry and you're hurt and you don't care right now about who's out there. So it's just getting them to understand that. So we start with our young babies, right? So Fort Worth ISD, we do pre-K programs. So you start looking at our kiddos in the pre-K program and in our kindergarten program. Those kids that have, a lot of those kids, how many of you had kids when you first took them to kindergarten that cried and didn't want to go in? Anybody in the room? Right? That's normal, right? Now, if they're crying 2 months into school and still don't want to go in, we've got a problem. You know what I mean? So the attachment issues and things like that, they have fears that maybe are a little bit different. Little kids are much less able to anticipate danger than our older kids. You know, they're not as suspicious, you know, as older kids, whereas they're just so open and wanting to do everything. And so a lot of times also, if they're dealing with a tragic event or a traumatic event, they're not going to be able to verbalize that to us, you know, because there might be some fear or there might be some shame. And so they don't verbalize that with us. So little kids, it's really hard sometimes. They're the hardest ones to identify because they can't express in words. They can't express to us what's going on. They also are more likely to, their little brains are just running and developing so fast that a lot of times the risk factor is in there too. And so they're trying new things and they're doing other things. And let's be honest, they depend completely on their caregiver, and then when they come to school, on us for everything, right? They can't do anything on their own yet. And so they're depending completely on us. And so there's a vulnerability there with our little ones. I had to do these are some of the other signs and symptoms, separation anxiety, all the different things. They may keep talking about something, but you don't understand what they're talking about. You know, they may just continue to tell you a story and you don't know what they're telling. It could be a story from a storybook they read, or it could be something that really happened. You know, you just don't know with the little ones what's going on. And this is where we start getting into some of the things like in our classrooms, like, you know, the little kid that when the lights go out during nap time, you know, they freak out because nap time, you know, they don't want to go to sleep. They don't like the lights off. You know, they are always complaining of something hurting. You know, you have that little kid in the elementary school that's always complaining that they're in the nurse's office more than they're in the classroom because something's hurting all the time. Changes in behavior if they start withdrawing from everything when they were actively engaged, you know, with stuff. And then all of a sudden they start withdrawing, or all of a sudden they start having angry outbursts. I mean, yeah, there's always the little kid that's going to bite or hit. That doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong. But if that behavior wasn't there before and then all of a sudden it is, then it could mean that there's something going on in the home, okay? So, and these are just some of the supports, some of the different things that we can do. Teaching techniques for dealing, and again, this is based on maybe some trauma, but it may just be behavioral. And so these are just some of the techniques that you would use with these kids. Just trying to help them so that, you know, they don't have those outbursts. They don't cry during nap time. They do feel comfortable, you know. If a bed buddy is what they need to get them through nap time, let them bring a bed buddy, you know, these things. You know, start trying to find solutions to some of the things that are causing the problems with them. So then we get to our elementary school age kids, okay? So I think about when I've never actually worked in an elementary school, but I am on the district's crisis response team. So that means that if there is any sort of a tragedy or a death, anything, then I'm called out to go work crisis response. So one of the times I got called out to go to an elementary school where a teacher of 30 years at that one campus had passed away suddenly. Like she'd gone for the weekend, and then Monday she didn't come back. And so we always kind of have this lotto system when you work a safe room, because sometimes you'll get to actually just be in the safe room, so you'll be working with, say, the faculty safe room, or you may work in the student safe room where the kids are actually brought into the safe room with passes or however they do it at their campus. And then sometimes we call it the short straw. It's when you actually draw the straw. That means you have to go into the classroom and you actually have to read and talk to the kids. You read to them what's happened, and you talk to the kids. Well, middle school, high school, you kind of have your form and you go in and everybody has to read the same thing so that every kid in the school is getting the exact same accurate information. So you're reading your form, and then you do if you'd like to talk to somebody else, we have counselors, we have intervention specialists in the safe room in the library. You don't have to come with me now, but if you feel like you need to, you just get a pass from your teacher and come on and see us. So that's what I'm prepared to do, right? Because I work safe rooms all the time. So I go to this elementary school, and I get there, and I drew the short straw. And I was like, all right, I got my form. I'm going to go into the classroom. It's not a big deal. Well, it turns out it's a second grade classroom, okay? So I wasn't prepared for that. And at the time, my 10-year-old was in second grade. So I go in the classroom, and it was another teacher in the classroom who was covering. She wasn't a sub. She was actually a teacher on the campus. And so she was a basket case because this was her friend. And so, but she wanted to be with her friend's babies. She didn't want to leave them with some sub from the district. She wanted to be with her friend's babies. So I walk in, and I'm prepared to stand at the door or stand in the front like I always do. And she goes, well, come on in. And there's a rocking chair, just like in every elementary classroom. There's the rocking chair and the big rug. And I'm like, oh, God, don't make me do this. Like, don't make me have to sit down. So she said, here, have a seat. And then she says, okay, kids, come here. And they all come over, and little kids, how they are. Like, they don't know boundaries. They don't know, so they're, at my feet. 20-something kids literally just surrounding me. And I'm in that rocking chair looking at them, and I have this form, which is district policy. Everybody reads the same thing. You're supposed to do it. Well, am I going to really read this form to this group of little 6- and 7-year-olds? So I'm looking at it, and then I'm trying not to cry because I'm thinking about my own child and what would it be like if because she loved her teacher, what would it be like if her teacher had passed away? So I'm trying not to personalize it. I'm trying to stay focused, stay professional. So I start trying to talk to this group of kids. And while I'm talking, this one little girl, she's interrupting. She's like, I can spell cat. I can do this. Just you name it, she's saying it. And you're just sitting there like, oh, okay. So I'm trying, like I said, I'm trying to keep my composure. I'm trying to she just keeps interrupting the whole time. And the teacher's like, yeah, she does that a lot. She's like, okay, you can only ask one more question, because the little girl kept asking a bunch of questions too. But it was random questions like, is it raining outside? Do you have a dog? It was just like she was just left field. And so the whole thing, so then she said this little girl can only ask me one more question. I'd already gotten through, talked to the kids, told them what had happened. And so the little girl raises her hand, and I'm not going to cry when I tell you all this, but the little girl raises her hand. She says, so, and I don't remember the teacher's name, unfortunately. She said, so is Miss So-and-so in heaven with my mom? Because my mom went there last week. And so I'm like, oh my gosh. All this time, I'm like, quit asking me these stupid questions. And then I'm thinking, this poor baby has lost her mom. And what's unfortunate is she lived with a grandmother. So they had not told the school that her mom had passed away. So for over a week, this kid's been going to school every day, and no one knows at the school what's going on. And increasingly, once I talked to the counselor and that teacher, increasingly this kid's behavior was getting worse. Well, no joke. Look at what she was going through silently, and none of us knew what she was going through. So it's just that kind of stuff. You have to wonder why there's that one kid or two kids, out of your basket of apples. Why is that one or two kids acting that way? What's going on that's causing them to act that way? And the phrase I always come up with is, kids do good when they can. And I feel like that's true. Majority of the kiddos are not acting out just to act out. They're doing the best they can, considering the circumstances that they're working with. And so, anyway, my PowerPoint went away. Give me just a second. Okay. So these are just some things that you're going to see, changes in behavior. This little girl was almost textbook with the changes in behavior. I mean, she had the angry outbursts, everything. And these are some other things you're going to see, is when they have had a traumatic event happen in their life, these are some of the things that you're going to see coming out in your classroom. And that's, I guess, because because I work in the Fort Worth ISD, you know, I'm focusing more on what we're seeing in our classrooms, because so much of the trauma that our kids are experiencing is hidden, and we don't know about it. I can't tell you how many times I have been at work and get an email from a teacher maybe a week or two after the fact that, oh, by the way, could you pull in so-and-so, you know, his mom died or his dad died or something like that. And you're like, we need to know this like up front. But a lot of times families are reluctant to tell us. And that's the frustrating part, is we're here to help. We have the resources to help. But if they don't tell us what's going on, then it's usually until we get some of these, the absenteeism, the distrust of others, the inappropriate behavior. That's when we find out what's going on with the kid, you know, and it would be so great if we could find that out ahead of time. Again, these are just some other ways of acting out different things that are going on, okay? And these are just some of the things, the outcrying that you're going to see, especially with an elementary age kid. They're not just going to come out and tell you what's going on. You're just going to see this. I teach Sunday school on Sundays. And I'm supposed to teach 4 and 5-year-olds, because I was like, I need a break from high school and middle school kids. So that'd be easy, but sometimes the teacher for the middle age group doesn't show up. And so I had this one little girl in my Sunday school class one day, and she comes every Sunday, but she constantly is acting out. She's that kid who's constantly acting out. She's hitting somebody. She's messing with somebody. She's 9 years old. She's doing this. She's doing that. And so one Sunday, it was a lesson on adoption, and it was this series that we're going through. And we were talking about adoption. So I really was concerned about it, because I have 2 kids that were foster kids that were adopted by their foster parents because their parents were abusive, that are in Sunday school. So I was concerned about this lesson because of those 2 young men. They were fine. They went through it. I mean, they just blew through it, no big deal. And this one girl goes, well, I'm adopted. And I said, okay, you know, she's, you know, like I said, she's hitting people. She's, like, they sing on stage, you know, once in a while. She's the one that's grabbing that microphone and just being goofy and just attention seeking. And she said she was adopted. And I said, oh, okay, well, that's cool. She goes, yeah, I live with my grandpa. And I said, oh, okay. And she goes, yeah. Now, this is in Sunday school with, you know, 15 other kids in there. And I said, oh, okay, well, that's cool. You live with your grandpa. She goes, yeah. He's really old, but I live with him. And I said, okay, well, that's cool. She goes, didn't stop. She goes, yeah, my dad's in prison. Yeah, my mom and sister, God only knows where they are. And then she just proceeds to punch the kid next to her again. And I'm like, you just laid a landmine here, and we've gone on to being goofy again. And so I talked to the director after it was over, and I was like, hey, you know, I noticed that, you know, Piper does seem to seek a lot of extra attention, you know, and this and that. I said, were you aware, you know, of kind of her story? And she goes, well, no. She said, I knew she lived with her grandfather, but she didn't know all the other story. And the fact that she was so flippant, like, you know, she's heard adults say, well, God only knows where your mother and sister are. You know, she's heard that over and over again. So it's like she's kind of desensitized to what's going on, but her behavior says something different. And so that's what we have to remember, is a lot of times in this elementary age, they really don't know what's going on, but their actions tell you something's going on. Does that make sense? Okay. Do y'all have any questions about anything with little ones so far up until now? Okay. And again, this is some more just acting out behavior, difficulty with authority, redirection, criticism. They're having nightmares. They can't sleep at night. Then they're coming to school and sleeping at school. You know, you see that a lot. The kid, yes, ma'am.
I have a question.
Yes.
I have a 7-year-old that continuously acts out.
Mm-hmm.
I know that he has some trauma, and he does see a therapist for it. But what sticks out is if he knows he's going to be with this certain person, he doesn't act out at all.
Mm-hmm.
But when he gets back to me, he acts out, and my husband. is he so comfortable with the home setting that he realizes, okay, I can be myself? Is that what's going on?
That's what I think. That's exactly what I think. He finds comfort in you, whereas he might be fearful of what reaction he might get from other people, and so he saves it all for you. You know? And so it's actually a good thing because he's getting it out. He's not withdrawing, but he knows when he can and can't. And I see that a lot with kids even in the high school setting. You know, you have certain teachers that don't put up with anything, and they got the referrals ready to go, right? And they're the ones that write referrals. And then you have other teachers who they don't write very many referrals, and the kids actually get something out of their class. And that's usually, it's like kids know where they can and can't be comfortable with themselves, being themselves. And so I think that has a lot to do with it. So it's actually a very, very much a compliment. It's just maybe a little frustrating at times.
So I have a question. How did you fix it?
Fix it? I think it's just setting boundaries, you know, growing in that relationship and setting boundaries, like it's okay to do this at certain times, but when I need you to be still and listen, then this is when we need to calm down. I mean, I think it's just setting it's a trust factor. First of all, you've got the trust, so it's just setting the boundaries and regulating when you can and can't do those things. It's like teacher in a classroom. If you've got this assignment, you know, I know they're supposed to teach bell to bell, but let's be completely honest. Is that happening most of the time? No. You have a warm-up, you do your assignment, and then you have the free time at the end. So it's just saying, okay, we're gonna do this, this, and this, and we're gonna get this done, and then we have time for silliness or whatever it is that's going on. So it's just setting those boundaries with them. So you're welcome. So again, just some of these behaviors you're going to see. All right, and then the intervention. Somebody asked about resources with the district earlier. The school district, we have family resource centers at 4 different locations throughout the school district. The Family Resource Center is a wonderful place. I make referrals to ours all the time, and I work directly with the counselors there because it's not just counseling through the Family Resource Center, but it's wraparound services in the community. So if there's resources out there that say we don't just personally know about, like, you know, I mean, I may have a resource book, a blue book, you know, that they had in the olden days, you know, that you go to and get resources from. But if you go through your Family Resource Center, you actually can they do an intake with the student, and they decide what services are best for that student. Because I might be making a referral because of student's behavior, or I might be making a referral because of a family situation. And once they get the parent in there and they do an assessment, then they can better help decide what services in the community are best to help those kiddos. So the Family Resource Centers are a great referral for us through the school district. And some of the resources are free, some are sliding pay scale. So that's great for us. And we also have, of course, with the district for our employees, we have the Employee Assistance Program. And back when I started, we had, I think you had like 7 or 8 sessions that you could go to. And then they knocked it down to just a couple. And just this past year, they bumped it back up to, I believe it's 3 or 4 sessions. And so that's a great resource for those of us who are in the school district or have our own children in the school district.
So when situations happen like what you were explaining, are those kids are able, is it referral based? For like the situation with the teacher? Because 3 years ago that actually happened at my child's school. And so going through that, because he actually had that teacher for 2nd grade and 5th grade. Wow. So when she passed, and it's so interesting he said that, I went to go talk to another teacher. I had 2 kids at the time, and I went to go talk to this teacher, and I remember that day. I was so mad at this lady because I had a complaint, and she just looked frazzled, and then she was like, I'm really sorry right now. I just cannot concentrate. We just had a teacher pass. And I was just like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, not knowing that who the teacher was. Right. Some made me go back in there and ask her, well, do you mind, you know, which teacher it was? And when she told me, I was like, oh my gosh, like this was like one of those teachers that everybody loved. Yeah. So, and knowing the fact that my son had the teacher for at least, 2-year span, I didn't tell him. I let him go because he was, at that time, went to middle school. And I called the middle school to ask them what were they doing. And so they had like individual, but like, is it more to it than just like that one day? Like, is it referral based for them? You know, because some kids have a really, like the kids who had it for second grade, and then they also had it for fifth grade, and then, you know, when you go back, if you're in like the neighborhood schools and you visit the school again and you see those teachers and then find out they're not here, how do you help them, you know, be able to know like this is okay?
Okay. So when we do a safe room, we have certain forms that we fill out for every kiddo that comes in. You may have a kiddo that comes in and is only in there for a few minutes. They cry, then they say, I'm ready to go back to class. You have those other kids who you can sort of sense just by conversation and by body language that they're not going to be able to just jump back into class right after that. And so those kids, we do take their names down, and their names we give to counseling and intervention at that school for follow-up. If it's a kid that I've seriously bonded with while I've worked the safe room, because sometimes safe rooms may be more than a day. You know, it's not often, but sometimes more than a day, just depending on what's happened. And so if it's a kiddo that I've personally bonded with, then I will go back to that school and I will do the follow-ups with that kid personally. And I know there's other people on the crisis team that do the same thing, because when that child was deeply in the emotional state of grieving, that child bonded with me, so that child doesn't want to then have to go, unless they know their counselor well or whatever. But a lot of times they want to talk back to me. And then once we talk again, or they're referred to counseling or intervention and they talk to them, if we feel like they need further assistance, then we will refer parents out to either Family Resource Center, Warm Place, things like that, because they may need more. And there could be, you know, a lot of times a trigger could be that, you know, like the one little girl that said something about her own mom. You know, it could be that, sorry, I punched that. You know, it could be that, you know, it triggered that. I mean, I've had kids in elementary schools that's triggered the death of a pet, you know, and so it's just this person's died. I mean, I've had kids come to safe rooms who, even in high school, they didn't even know the person that died, but they know that they've had someone in their life die, and it triggered, you know, that grief again, whereas maybe they'd pushed it down and weren't even, you know, never even maybe let themselves grieve, or maybe it's been 2-3 years that have passed, and all of a sudden they find out about somebody dying, and then it creates that. So you don't really know what triggers our kids, and so, but always we continue to refer.
Like ongoing.
Absolutely, ongoing, yes. No, you're fine.
How do you draw the line? One of our core principles is resilience.
Yes.
And I struggle trying to coach my team on where do you draw the line between you are allowing a kid to be victimized or not to be able to process through things on their own and learn how to process it and being supportive. Because I want to be supportive, but I also want them to become self-sufficient so they can do for themselves what I've been creating a bridge. So where do you draw the line?
Well, I think you get to a point, like personally for me, I focus on coping skills with my kids. When I have a kiddo come to me, we have a certain amount of time that we spend talking about the trauma or what's brought them to my office, what's created the outburst of whatever sort, whether it's social or emotional or behavioral. We talk about that, and then we start working on coping skills. And if you walk into my office, it looks like I'm at an elementary school, but my kids love my office because it looks like they're at, when is the funnest time of your life? When you're, you know, when you're a little kid, you get off the school bus, and how do you get into the building as an elementary school kid? You run. Everybody's running, right? Can't wait to see my teacher. Can't wait to see what's for lunch, you know? When you're in middle school, you're not running, but you're not, you know, you're still actively wanting to get there. When you get off the bus in high school, it's like, oh, it's like, you know, nobody wants to go. So when they come into my office, I have lots of tactile things. I have things for them to play with. I have puzzles, I have fidgets, I have games, I have shaker globes where, you know, it has the water bottle that has the oil and the glitter in it, and we shake the glitter ball, and so the glitters and it looks like a snowball, and then we set it down and it's like the sands of time. And once the glitter, you know, we talk about all the bad, but once the glitter settles and it's clear again, then we start talking about resiliency skills and coping skills and things we can do to make it better. What can we do next time so that, you know, if something triggers you, what can we do next time that may help you work through it so you don't have to necessarily be pulled out of class or have that emotional outburst, of that. So we work on coping skills all the time, and I'll just tell them, what works for you? Tell me what works, Do you like to color? No. Do you like to draw? No. Do you like to journal? Do you like writing things down? What about music? Okay, well then we have to be careful what kind of music, because some music can make us more angry. Some music can bring us even lower than we were. So let's talk about what music works for us. I had one kid who, he was on the spectrum, and he had serious issues with noise, with volume. And so our principal passed away. And so when we had an interim principal come in, that principal said no headphones, absolutely no headphones. Okay, didn't want earbud, nothing, no headphones. Well, that's what this kid did, was he put those headphones on, because when it got loud in the classroom, he tuned everybody out. Well, when he didn't have those headphones, because he got in trouble for them, that noise just would get to him, so he'd have these crazy emotional outbursts. And so he'd end up in the principal's office, and we were like, he's not acting out because he wants to hurt somebody. He's acting out because he does not know how to handle that volume. And so I got him in my office, and I was like, okay, so we did end up getting special permission for him to have the headphones. But I started talking to him about what are some things we could do if you ever get in a situation like that where the volume gets too loud or whatever. What are some things you like to do? I was like, so I went through do you like to color? Do you like to do puzzles? Do you like to draw? Do you do music? Do you do all of that? And he goes, well, I like cards. And I said, okay. So I said, well, I don't have any cards. It's the one thing I didn't have. I said, but, he said, well, I have cards. I said, okay, well, get your cards out. So he gets this deck of cards out. And I said, well, what do you like to play? And I'm thinking in my mind, oh, I haven't played cards in so long. Like, I'm going to, I play Uno every once in a while, but that's about it. And I said, so what do you want to play? And he goes, no, I don't want to play with you. And I said, okay, so what do you want to do? And he said, well, can I go over to that table? So I have a table on the other side of my office. And so I said, well, sure. So he goes over to the table, and I started typing something. Like, I was like, okay, he's doing his own thing, right? So I look over, this kid's building a house of cards, like a whole house with that deck of cards. And then I look over, and I was like, yeah, that's really cool. And he goes, yeah. And then all of a sudden he goes, and he just knocks them all down. And then he picks all of his cards up, puts them back in the deck, and he comes back to me, and he goes, can I have a pass and go back to class now? And I went, absolutely. He walked out. I was like, wow, that was like the easiest counseling session I've ever had. I didn't have to do anything, So, I mean, it's just, you find what works for them, I've never had another kid want to build a house of cards. But this kid could come in my office and be in the fetal position 1 minute, building a house of cards, and getting a pass back to class in 15 minutes. So it just, you don't know what works for them. So that's what I always push is you tell me what could work for you. What do you enjoy doing? What could help you work through it? So, I think I skipped a slide. So this, unfortunately, with our older kids, did I skip a slide? Okay. So unfortunately, with our older kids, what I see is obviously more risky behavior, increase in risky behavior with substance abuse or different things like that. Concerns being labeled abnormal. It's interesting if you go into the cafeteria of a high school, how you see your cliques, your different sections of kids, And you've always got that one group of kids that plays those weird card games, the not Pokemon, but I don't know what they're called. But you know what they look like, and they're just odd and different. But it works for them. And I have a nephew that was that kid. And he's still that kid. He still goes to those game rooms and does that. I mean, as a grown-up, so sometimes they're labeled as abnormal because they're just kind of one of these things is not like the other kind of thing, okay? And so they also experience, unfortunately, shame and guilt. And a lot of times that comes out in aggression because they're holding all of that in and they don't know how to let it out. I had a young lady that was referred, make sure I'm good on time. I had a young lady that was referred, she transferred to our school from out of state. And she was an extremely intelligent young lady. She was super smart. And one day, the counselor introduced her to me because she came in mid-year. She introduced her to me, And so we talked and everything, and I said, if you ever need to talk, you can come to my office. Didn't know any background, just knew that she was new to our school. Campus monitor comes in one day with her, and this kid, I'm in a portable building, thankfully, because she comes in and she's just screaming and cussing and crying, and nobody knows what's going on. And evidently she'd been in the bathroom and she'd knocked the toilet paper, or not the feminine product thing, off the wall in anger. And so the campus monitor, who I'm friends with, said, I don't want to take her to the office because she's going to get in trouble for breaking school property, and I think there's something way more serious than she's just angry. And so I was like, okay. So she left her with me, and we got to talking, and she cried and cried and cried. I mean, it took, I would say, 30, 40 minutes for this kiddo to even want to talk to me. She didn't know who I was, other than she met me the first day she came into the school. So we get to talking, and she never really told me what was wrong that day. She and her boyfriend, who was not in school, but who always wanders around the school, they'd had a fight because she didn't call him during passing period to tell him where she was or who she was with. And like I said, he's not enrolled in a school, but he lives in some apartments right down. They built some new apartments right down from my school, and he lived in those apartments. And so he wanted a check-in in between passing periods, and she didn't check in with him. So he got upset with her, and she was on her phone, and he cussed her out. She cussed him out, and then she went in the bathroom and, tore up school property. So that's what we know at this point, that she's had an argument with a boyfriend. So all I know at this point is she's got a controlling boyfriend. And that's all I know. So she calmed down, we worked through it, kind of came up with a plan. If you ever get upset again, this is what we need to do. So we were fine, right? She goes on her merry way. I don't think anything of it other than controlling boyfriend, emotional teenage girl, right? So she comes to my office, and it was the 4th or 5th time we talked that she comes in and she sits down, and I'd already had a conversation with her mom, because her mom said, I don't know, she said she doesn't normally talk to people, but she likes talking to you. And I said, well, cool, that's great. So, but Mom didn't give me any background information, nothing, okay? So again, all I know is she's in a Mom said she's having sex, first time with this boy, in a relationship. Mom had actually moved her to Western Hills because on the promise that she would go on birth control if she got transferred. So it was one of those weird, I knew the family dynamics were odd, but I just, again, didn't know everything. Didn't get any more information. So one day she comes into my office and she asks if she can talk, and she's real calm. And I'm like, yeah, sure, come on in. So she sits down and we're talking, and this child literally just spills her whole life story. I don't know what happened that caused her to finally open up and want to talk. She starts telling me how when she was 18 months old, and then she starts taking her shoes off. And I'm like, oh, wow, she's really comfortable with me, right? And then she starts taking her socks off. And I'm like, okay. And then she starts rolling her pants up. And she shows me she had 3rd-degree burn scars all over her legs. And then she showed me her back. It was literally like from here down, her body was massive burn scars from when she was 18 months old. Her mom's boyfriend doused her in a bathtub full of scalding hot water. And she still, to this day, has to get surgeries because, and you're better at this than me, because I guess as her skin grows and her skin stretches, they have to do these surgeries and do grafts to help her as she gets older, correct? Is that how that works? So I'm just like, I'm just shocked, first of all, that she opened up to me, and then I'm wondering, so where are we going with this? Like, where are we going? So then she gets to telling me how they thought it was her mom at first. So CPS took her away from her mom, but then they found out it was the boyfriend. He did end up in prison for it, but then other stuff happened. She never lived with mom, basically from all of her childhood up until she hit middle school. But unfortunately, she lived with mom's biological parents who were physically abusive to her. So she had experienced, like, in one foul swoop, she basically, everything that could have happened to a kid, she's telling me has already happened to her. And she's 15 years old, and all she wants to do is marry this controlling boy and have a baby. Like, that's her life goal, is to marry this boy and have a baby and get away from mom. Because now mom has her back, and mom's trying to play parent for the first time, you know, and it's not working. So she's rebelling, she's this, she's that. So it turns out, I talked to Mom. Mom is so open, Mom is so willing, she has such guilt. She's doing the best she can with what she's working with. She's trying so hard, but the problem is she's trying to be this perfect parent, and this is a 15-year-old who's, you've never been my parent. Why are you parenting me now, you know? And so we were able to get them through Family Resource Center. We were able to get them family counseling, and she ended up, at the end of the school year, doing much better. They are actively in counseling. She's so stinking smart, too. I mean, she is such an intelligent young lady. And she does not want to have a baby now. So that was my, I didn't want that. You know, that was my biggest thing, because that was her life goal that day in my office, is I just want to have a baby. I want to, yes.
Yeah, one of the things I say is, you mentioned an alert word for me, working with kids that haven't been through it myself. Controlling boyfriend, you know, is definitely abuse.
Yes.
That turns into really bad, usually really bad physical abuse.
Yes. Yes. And okay, several red flags with this young man. He got kicked out of his home, so he wasn't even living in the apartments anymore. He didn't have any clothes because they kicked him out, and he didn't have a driver's license. He didn't have his birth certificate, so supposedly he couldn't get a job. She felt really sorry for him, so she came to me, and we have a care closet at my school, so she asked if I could get some clothes for him. So I was like, absolutely. I'm never going to ever turn a kid down that needs something. I don't care if he's a student or not. And so we start going through the care closet, and I start handing her stuff that I think looks good. And then she's like, no, he can't wear that. It's blue. And I said, okay, well, I handed her other stuff. She said, do you have anything red? So then I'm like, oh, geez. So, you know, I got all these red flags coming at me. Well, one of the shirts that I gave her was a red hoodie that said Lifeguard Alcatraz. I have no idea who donated that. I thought it was funny, right? You know, and I was like, okay. So then one day I'm driving to school. I'd had a meeting at the ad building, so I'm driving back to school, and I see him sitting on the curb. Well, I know it's him because he Lifeguard Alcatraz. So I know it's him. And so then all of a sudden I get to school and I check her attendance, and I find out she hadn't been in her morning classes. So I start checking the bathrooms. She was in one of the bathrooms upset because they'd had an argument. One other time Mom calls and she says that she's upset because nobody had told her daughter's attendance was bad. Well, it turns out we didn't have the correct phone numbers. There wasn't, you know, the way attendance works, you get the phone call, but you don't actually, you get like the recorded call, but the phone call after 5 days, you know, that kind of thing. And so there'd been some switch up in that. I don't remember the story with that. And so I had left campus to go to the elementary school, and on my way back, I see my little girl and Mr. Alcatraz getting ready to go into Lisa's Chicken. I'm like, during the middle of the school day, and it's not lunchtime, and she's not allowed off-campus lunch anyway. So I get Mom, and we literally went to Lisa's and got her from Lisa's and got her back, and I was like, you have to be accountable. Like, we have to start working on fixing this. And she and the boy are still together, but again, she at least doesn't want to get pregnant. And my prayer is over the summer that doesn't happen. You know, you don't know what's going to happen, but they are actively in counseling. So mom is willing to work with her, and I'm hoping that at some point he just moves on. But the controlling boyfriend, and it is abuse. It is abuse a lot of times. But that's all she knows. I mean, if you think about it, what else does, you know, the transgenerational and everything, you know, she doesn't know anything different, you know. And so you see that a lot. So I'm not going to, let's see, where are we at time-wise too? Okay, so do y'all have note paper? Everybody has something to write on? So I want you guys to just write down quickly for me. I want you to write down 4 things that you cherish most in your life. There's 4 things you cherish most. And I'll give you a few seconds to do that. My microphone's slipping. And I'm sweating. It's not going to shock me or anything. Okay, give me a heads up when everybody's got that. Okay? So now I want you to take those 4 things and I want you to prioritize them, 1 through 4, if you haven't already done that. Okay? So as an adult, look at your 4 things and think if one of those, just one of those 4 things was taken away from you. Think about how traumatic that would be in your world right now. Okay? So think about yourself as an adolescent, whether it's a young child, elementary school, middle, high school. Think about yourself in that age group. And if one of those 4 things, if in fact you could even name 4 things when you were that kid, and it not being materialistic things, think if one of those 4 things was taken away from you and you don't have the resiliency or the coping skills to work through it, and you don't have anybody to help you work through it, think about what that's going to look like in that age group. And that's what we're working with in trauma-informed classrooms. That's what we're working with our kids. We have kids that are working through just horrible stuff, and they're not telling us what it is. We don't know about it till a lot of times we see it in this acting out behavior. And so that's what we're working with in our kids. So again, I go back to the saying, kids do good if they can. They're not acting bad just because they want to act bad. There's something going on that's keeping them from being like all the other apples in the bunch. Okay? So, anyway, thank y'all. Y'all have any questions? I'm sorry. Oh, yes, yes. Got that? Okay. So these are just some of the interventions. Again, Family Resource Center is huge for me personally. I refer a lot to the Family Resource Center. Just FYI, I don't do a lot of referrals for drugs and alcohol, even though that was one of the risk factors associated, because a lot of times, to me, the drugs and alcohol, it's a dual diagnosis type thing. So that's what they're doing to self-medicate and help cope. So it's the main problem that we're working with. So a lot of times numbers are skewed when it looks at what referrals are made for, because as far as I'm concerned, them smoking marijuana is the least of my problem right now. We're working with the bigger picture of what's really going on. And so, and then therapy, and then structured psychotherapy, depending. And again, we go back to, I always suggest a visit to your family doctor, because so many of our kids don't go to the doctor ever. And so I always recommend that, but I'm highly against medication only as opposed to medication and the counseling with that. And so, hopefully we're getting further away from that, but there's nothing worse than when a kid comes back and says, yeah, they took me to the doctor, and I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, they put me on da-da-da-da-da, and I'm like, okay, well, so did they give you any referrals for counseling services? No. And you're just like, so that's some of our interventions, and then do that one last slide. And then these are just the resources that I came up with, to get the PowerPoint, get the presentation ready.
And that's in our package that you...
Yes, you have all of that information in your packet. So do you have any questions that you wanted to ask either of us that didn't get answered? Anything to share?
I have a question.
Yes.
So, you mentioned everything while school is going on.
Right.
Really great. So are these resources available during the summer?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's several of us that work throughout the summer as well. And so like I got a call from one of the trainers at my school that needs me to come back this afternoon to see a kid that made an outcry earlier today. Not a suicidal outcry, but an outcry of something that he needs to talk about. So yeah, so we try and still make sure we have these resources year-round for the kids. Because just because school stops doesn't mean life stops. So we try and make it available to them. Yes, ma'am.
We have what we call a calming room on our campus.
Mm-hmm.
And my wondering is there any guided counseling that's available through like a webinar or something where it's a video? Because I want to leave the campus where it could continue on even after grant money ends. So that's my wondering, because that would be a free resource.
TBRI?
TBRI? What
Is that's not the grant y'all are under?
No, we work Wallace Foundation.
Okay. There are resources. It's amazing what you can find now and how much free resources there are and videos and things. Yeah, there's tons of stuff out there, but I think if you go through the Family Resource Center, they may be able to give you information even on agencies that'll come in free into the school even.
Is that resource only available in Tarrant County, or is it also available in Dallas?
I'm not completely sure about that, but I would assume that that would be available through Dallas as well.
Does she mean our Fort Worth ISD FRCs?
Wait, are you asking about Fort Worth ISD FRCs or just information, resources available out there?
The campuses that I support are in Dallas.
Okay, so I would get with the administration in Dallas and find out if y'all have those resources. Normally,
I would be surprised.
yeah, I would think that they would, as big of a district as they are.
Well,
But-
even our guys, our folks at our FRCs could help you
Yeah.
find those resources too.
Well, hey, I got a new best friend.
Just remember, my name is Dennis.
I gotta turn around and see you. I keep hearing the voice, Dennis, but I can't see you. Where you?
Over your left shoulder. I'm just teasing.
Any other questions
He's
for us?
joking with you.
I can give you the information on Family Resource in a minute, though, okay? So,
Dennis got me looking hard.
y'all have any other questions?
Don't play with my emotions.
She's like writing Dennis down in her phone. All right, well then, thank y'all very much for coming. We appreciate you. Thank you.